Welcome to this tutorial on the batch real groups and the batch tab inside of the Flame desktop. So if you've been following along in chronological order with these videos, most of what we've done up until now has been on what we call our real groups, our desktop real groups. So we've been making some edits, we've been doing some conforms, and we've been looking at how batch effects sits on those clips, and that is a good way of working. Okay, everything that we do is contained within an edit, and all of our effects on those clips as well. It's quite organized. A lot of people like working like that. There is, however, a different workflow or a complementary workflow that exists inside of the desktop as well. And this is where really the batch desktop comes in. So if you've been playing around with the software, you've probably expanded out some of these, and you've probably seen that there's a batch name here, and you may have clicked on the eyeball and seen that it's actually schematic reels and not really sure what's going on, and you may have sort of jumped back to the safety of the reel groups, which is kind of fine. But we're going to now explain what these do and how they kind of work, and you would use those in practice. If we right click on our desktop, we can see that we can create multiple reel groups and multiple batch groups within a desktop environment. So it really just means that we could have like another reel group here that may be a different house that we're trying to sell, or a different version or language version of the commercial. And once again, each of these areas kind of keep everything nice and tidy. This would be all of my edit and all of my material for this particular house that I'm selling, and this could be another one. The same is true for the batch environment. So each batch reel group that we've got here is basically a setup, and it's going to contain all the media and all the renders that are relevant for that particular shot that we're working on. But we could also have multiple batch groups within a desktop as well. So we could have multiple composites, multiple versions, and all their renders. Once again, it keeps it all nice and tidy and organized. Don't forget, if you're working in this way, that at some point you want to save your whole desktop into your library so that it's nice and safe and that you can come back and revisit things, and it's going to save all your media, your setups, etc. in that environment. So I'm going to delete that one we just made, and we're going to come back to this. So this by and large is exactly the same as the normal desktop reel groups. So we're going to go and browse for some media. We've got a beach. I'm going to take that in as a background. We're going to drop that there for a second. We're going to come up a couple of levels, and I'm going to go and find some green screen, and we're going to drop this in as well. So when we come back to our batch desktop, as it were, you can see that we've now dropped that media into those reels, pretty much like our normal editorial desktop. The difference being is that now we've populated this area, the batch schematic is now also populated. So this is really your flow graph representation of how you want to work. This is really going to be like an organizational view, and it's also going to take care of some renders when we start rendering out of our batch tab. Anything we do in either view will kind of mimic it as regards media. So if we went to batch and we came here and we right clicked and we duplicated the beach, we went back to our desktop view of that, you can see that we've actually duplicated it on there as well. And if we deleted it from here, it's going to be no surprise that we actually delete it from the batch environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how this works in practice. We're going to set up a little comp and see how we can take advantage of the versioning and the rendering mechanism inside of batch. So split our viewports up into two, so we can just frame some things up. You can see that we've got a little bit of an issue with this. It's a crazy aspect, so we're going to go through and correct that physically. So if we double tap on here, we can go into our resize node. We're going to set it to 1280 720, and we're just going to kind of get that to fillet. That's going to correct the aspect for me nicely. So the idea is that we're going to do a really rough comp of this, and we're going to kind of save it and version it and render it as well. So we're going to generate a key for this. So we're going to come down, we're going to find a master keyer for a moment. Let's, here we go. That's the one we want. We're going to hook that up. This is not going to be an amazingly great key because we just really sort of want to crack through and get the idea and the concept. So I'm just going to make this really kind of quite awful. But so this is more about the concept of what we're kind of doing rather than the quality of my work, as it were. So we're going to take the color corrected front out of that for a second, and we're going to composite both of these inside of an action. So this is all sort of stuff that we've covered. We're going to keep it nice and consistent. We're going to pop out a connector for my background plate. I'm going to pop out a connector for my key and my mat. There we go. And once again, if we kind of come into my composite here, it's not the best, but like I said, this is more about concepts and how to use it rather than the quality of what I'm doing. We're going to put a standing on the beach there. We can actually mask this out in context here with our Gmask. So let's go and find a Gmask quickly. We're going to drag that up. We're going to draw a rough little mask around all this. We're going to come down here. Now, if you remember, we want to make this selective to just that layer. So we're going to draw out a Gmask link and also going to invert that to get rid of everything else. So there we go. We've got our composite, but oh, hang on. I'm not sure if that's actually the right length. So let's go and have a look back at this. So there's a couple of things that we need to be aware of when we start working inside of standalone batch. So when you start working in the batch environment, initially all the composites are 100 frames long. Now we can see here, if we look at the data on the clip, that this is actually 276 frames long. So we can actually make this batch composite as long or as short as you want to, but generally you want it to match the length of one piece of footage. That's going to be your comp length. That's what you're probably going to be rendering out. So yeah, we could click in this field and we can type in 276, but there's a couple of hotkeys that we're going to be using. That's going to make life a little bit easier for us a bit later on when we start working with shots that we pull out from an edit. So the one we want for this, if you want to set this batch comp length, the length of the clip, if you hold down the T key and double tap on any clip, it will set it to that particular length. So it's now set to 276. So T and double click on a clip. The other thing we want to do is we want to start thinking about how this is going to be saved. So we actually want to save this setup, but we also want to render this setup out. So if we look just for a second up here, my batch that I'm working on down here, the name of the batch is just called generic batch 1. Now we can actually go through and rename this and give us a custom name. We can also start up something called like a versioning name system. So when we start to make versions or iterations as we call them, it will follow in sync. So if we tap in this field, we get a dialog box comes up. We're going to name this beach comp because that's what it is. And you can see that the default pattern is that the token is going to be the batch name plus the iteration name with padding. And of course, there's a whole bunch of tokens that we can kind of add onto that, you know, your username, the workstation it was done, the time and date, etc. But essentially, we're just going to leave it at beach comp version 1. And at this stage, we want to start off what we call the iteration process or the versioning process. So at the moment, we're kind of like in a limbo area. We want to start this iteration process, this versioning process off. So we're going to hit iterate, and it's going to save and make up my first version. So if we look at the little drop down here, we now have beach comp 001. This is my first version. So this acts as a way where you can, on the fly, just start to version things up. And we've got several options when we click on that button as well. Now we need to get this back out to the outside world. At the moment, it only lives inside of here, and we haven't got a batch effects node to take care of feeding this back into a timeline. So what do? Well, if we look at our input-output bin, we can actually bring up a render node, and we can connect that render node into the pipeline. So this render node is going to take care of where this renders to, and also like a queue system as well. And you can see here we've got some data on this that we can manipulate as well. But essentially, this is going to populate a render somewhere, and by default it's going to go back to my batch renders on my batch desktop. Now also what I'd like to do is I would like the name of this render to be in sync with what I'm calling my batch. So at the moment it's just called render 79. Now once again I can add tokens on here, but if I click in this field it brings up a dialog box. We can just delete that pattern and we can say we'll just keep in sync with the batch iteration that I'm kind of working on. So you can see now that this name is going to mimic the name of my batch. I'm going to rename that as well. Now we've made some changes since I started off the iteration process in as much as I've added a render node. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to resave over that. So let's change this down to, we could do this like as 10-bit. And now let's iterate that. And it's going to, because there's already an iteration there, number 1, I could either version up on this or I could replace it. Well, actually what I want to do, I'm not versioning at this point. I've made some changes which I want to save. So I'm just going to overwrite that iteration. So now I've got my comp, I've got my length, I've got my naming convention set up. What I can do now is I can just hit render. It's going to go through and render that through. That is not the best. That's probably the worst comp ever, but never mind. It's all good. When that's finished, we can look at it directly here in batch, or just make things obvious. If we go back to the timeline view, you can see now that we have that as a flattened final rendered clip, and it's called Beach Comp 001. Now at this point, if I want to go and make another version of this, maybe I want to clean it up, or I want to sort of change the color or something. If I come back into my batch view, I've already saved this, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to iterate up to version 2. I'm going to increment this. You can see that the name increments up as well as the render node as well. So I'm going to come into here. We're going to make a change, so maybe we'll add a color correct. Let's do a matchbox color correct. Let's see if I can find, there we go. We're going to drop that in there, and maybe we'll take all the saturation out of the background. And that does make a lot of sense, but it's going to be significantly different. Can we come back to our batch view, and I'm going to render this out. But before I do that, obviously what I want to do is I want to save the changes that I've just made. So I'm going to iterate and replace, and now I'm going to hit render. And now it's going to render out a version with a completely black and white beach scene. See, that's not a good place to go on holiday. You do not want to go there. And then when that's finished, if we come back to a timeline, you can see we have a version 1 and a version 2 of those clips that we can play through. So now you've got the idea that this reel group, this batch reel group, is going to be containing my media, but it's also going to be containing my renders. And because we've iterated this, because we've done versions, it means that we can actually go backwards and forwards through my versions, or we can do subversions of a particular comp. So, you know, maybe I didn't want a saturated version. Maybe I want to go back to my original one. I can either replace the whole batch setup, or I can append it into this batch setup. I want to replace it. And you can see now that we've gone kind of back in time to version 1, and I've got my original full color one, and I could actually from there go off, make another change and iterate to version 3. Okay, so you're kind of getting the idea of what we're doing with batch as a standalone entity. It contains your source media, your renders, but also your versions. Now down here, the versions are only sort of visible under this little drop down, the iteration button, but they're actually there in your setup in your desktop. So if we right click on here, we can actually show the batch iterations. Now you would only really want to kind of show these if you wanted to maybe copy out a setup, or maybe sort of organize at the end of a job. You know, maybe you've got hundreds of versions, and you know that the last 10 are actually the really good ones. So the iterations by default are hidden, so it doesn't sort of cause too much visual chaff in the workspace. But for sure you can go through, and you can if you expand these out, you can see that this contains all my media from my first setup. And of course, if you're adding media or subtracting media as we work through the versions, then each of these setups would reflect the media that is needed to rebuild that comp. So it's quite an elegant mechanism. So we're just going to go back for a second. We're just going to hide the batch iterations for a moment. And we're going to look next, now we've got the concept of this, we're going to look next on how actually this ties into the actual reel groups and the editorial desktop. So here we are back on our editorial reel groups, and you can see that this is our nice house commercial thing that we were working on as a conform. And say for instance, if we come to our large player here for a second, say for instance we actually wanted to break one of these shots out. Maybe we wanted to give it to another operator, or maybe we just want to sort of do multiple versions of a particular shot and sort of bring them back into the timeline. So we're going to be looking at how we can get media out of the timeline and into that standalone batch environment. So of course all these clips, they have names. So this is called Nice House 231001. So this is kind of like the clip name. And now what I really want to do is I want to be able to get this out of the timeline and into batch in some way, but I want to be able to preserve all the metadata on this and also things like the ins and outs. You can see that it's got 4 heads and 14 tails on this, and I sort of want to maintain that. I don't want to have a clip that comes back that's only the length of this particular segment, just in case I have to go and modify the edit. So what we can do is we've got a mechanism inside the timeline which is called matching. So if we kind of right click down here on all the contextual elements that we have for this segment, one of them is called match. And we're not going to go too deeply into this, but essentially the defaults are going to allow you to match out the source segment whilst maintaining the indicators for the ins and outs and also with the metadata. So the hotkey for this is M, or you can come down here and you can go match, the name of the contextual menu there. I'm going to do it with the hotkey. I'm going to select the element I want to match out. I'm going to hit M, and it's going to then ask me where I want to put that clip. So we're going to put it on the next reel up. And if we look at that as a source, you can now see that what we've actually got is that source has been matched out, but it remembers where the ins and outs for it exist as it is in the editorial timeline. Now what we want to do on this is we want to work on this standalone. So we need to get it into a batch environment. So up here in my desktop, we're going to right click, we're going to create a new batch group. And I'm going to call this kitchen shot. Now there's ways that we can actually go through and automatically do this from the editorial point of view when we start doing the conform. But once again, that's probably a tutorial that warrants a whole video on its own. So we're just going to concentrate on how the mechanism works if we're just matching out shots from our sequence. So if we open that up now, we can see that we've got the same wizard we had in our beach comp. We've got kind of like different schematic reels. We're going to pick this up from my my reel group, and we're going to drop it into one of the schematic reels there. And you can see that when I do that, it physically is going to move it, not copy it. It's going to move it into this new schematic reel in my new batch reel group. So now if I turn on the icon for this, you can see that I have my clip in there. And if I go into my batch view, you can see once again I have my clip present in batch. So let's split the views up. Now we know there's a couple of things that we really need to do from the last example. So we're going to hold down T and double clip. So now this is 141 frames, which is the length of this. And you can see that it also knows where those ins and outs are relative to this clip. So this we're just going to do a couple of simple things. We're going to start off by doing, we're going to track in some text on the tap, maybe something like that. So let's bring an action out. Because it's a custom resolution, we want to kind of feed that in as a background. So it's going to set the resolution of my action to be the same. And we're going to drop into action, and we're just going to frame everything inside of there. So the idea about this is that we want to have as this sort of like zooms back, maybe we'll have like a little bit of text that's attached to the sort of tap that's kind of sitting there. So if you remember to do that, we're going to be using an axis as a tracker. So I'm going to come into my tracking tab for a second, and we want to do position and scaling on this. I think it's probably a good idea. We're going to enter the tracker then with 2 trackers. So let's go and position those. We've got a little highlight there, which is pretty good. And I know it's not strictly correct because it's in a slightly different area. We've got a little highlight there. That's kind of quite good as well. We're going to gang those together. We're going to make the width sort of like fairly small, both of those, so we don't pick up anything else. And we'll also make the search pattern fairly small as well, so something like that. So when we're kind of happy with that, we're just going to analyze that through. And there you can see that we've got a track for our position and our scaling. So when we come back to here, we want to bring in some sort of kind of text. So once again, we go to a no bin. We're going to bring out some 3D text. We're going to call this, let's give it a name. This is going to be kitchen taps. Awesome. We're going to make it kind of big, and we're also going to give it a little bit of depth. And just to make it more noticeable, we're going to go to our node preferences in our rendering. We'll turn on shading, and we'll make the shading 100%. So to get that to follow the motion, we're going to take our tracking information, we're going to hook it up, and now you can see that what we're going to have is that that's going to follow the position, and also from that second tracking point we're going to have the scaling as well. So let's leave it there to start with. This is going to be kind of like our version 1, as it were. So we're going to go back into our schematic for a second. We need to get this rendered back out and then dropped back into my timeline, but we need to preserve a couple of things on this. So let's go back down to our effects nodes. We're going to bring out a render node, and we're going to hook that render node in. Now, like we had before, we've got some extra criteria on this that we would like to populate through. So if you think about it, what would be nice would be to maintain the original segment name, the sort of information that was on the clip. So we've got some way of referencing this back. If I just render this out as kitchen shot 1, I don't really know what that relates back to. I could actually come up here and call my batch reel group the same name as this, and like I said, there is an automatic way of doing that when we do the conform, but in this case I'm just doing this a bit ad hoc. So my render node here, I would like to take from the name of this particular clip. So we've got a couple of hotkeys that's going to allow me to transfer the metadata over. So if you look at the moment, this is called render 91. I've got this selected. I'm going to hold down the N key on the keyboard for name, double tap in there, and you can see that now this is called Nice House 2310. So this is now my kind of clip name, my segment name, by inheriting it from the clip that I tapped onto. The other thing I'd like to also do is inherit the properties of this clip. So I'd like to know where the ins and outs are and everything else, the frame rate. So once again, if I have my render node selected, but hold down the T key and double tap on this, you can see now what it's done is actually set the bit depth, the frame rate, and also the time code for the ins and outs. So this is kind of all ready to go. Now, once again, there's just 2 more things we really kind of want to do before we kick this off. I would like to know in the render name what batch setup this was associated with. So you can see that this is kitchen shot 01. This is the name of my segment. So if I kind of tap in here, this is the name. I'm going to put an underscore in, and I'm going to add a token that's going to be the batch iteration. So you can see now that it's maintaining that metadata, but it's also telling me what batch desktop this was associated, what setup and what version this is. I'm going to hit rename on that. Now, once we've done all that, we're going to sort of start off the iteration process. So I'm going to iterate that up. I'm going to iterate and replace to make sure that it's saved. So now everything that I've done with the render node, my comp, is all saved up nicely. And this is going to go back to my renders. So we're just going to render this version out. Awesome. We're going to come back to my timeline, and you can see here now that we have our ins and outs. We have the name of the original segment, and we also have it appended with the batch setup that it came from. If we look at that, we can play that through. That's my actual render. Now, I want to get this now back into my timeline. So this is where my renders are going. And if you remember, I need to drop this back into my original edit as a kind of like a version. So let's actually move the render. We're going to pick it up and we're going to move it back into my reel groups. So now we are back on my desktop reels. Let's open this back up as my my edit for a second. And just to make this a little bit more obvious, we're going to just swap to our source sequence viewer. And we're going to select that. Now, if you remember, we talked a little bit about extra functions in this blue drop down. So we've got a couple of things. There's several ways to sort of replace this back in. But what we're going to do is we're going to use a thing called replace media on this particular instance. So you can see here that the hotkey is Control-Shift-R. What this means is that we're going to be kind of looking at things like the method that we're going to be literally replacing the media inside of this kind of clip. So this is my original version without the text. This is my version that I've just rendered. And we're not going to do an editing operation. We're not going to do sort of like an overwrite or an insert or anything like that. We're actually going to use that replace media. So with this selected, if you kind of look at the 2 screens for a moment, they're both in, you know, kind of slightly different places. But when I come down to here and I go replace media, it now swaps in, regardless of the ins and out points. It's kind of doing like a smart replace into here. my new version. So I've now got my kitchen taps. You can see I've still got my heads and towels, and it's replaced it with this kitchen shot #1. So let's take this to like its logical progression where maybe we're working with multiple versions, and maybe you're kind of showing this to your client or somebody just for quick review, as it were. So if we go back to my batch desktop for a second, and I'm going to make a couple more versions of this. So let's make a new version. Let's iterate and increment this up. So this is now version 2. And maybe on this particular one, I want to sort of drop in some additional animation. So if we kind of look at what's going on here, maybe we could just move the position of this slightly up on this axis. Maybe we also could make it a little bit bigger, so it's a bit more obvious. And down in our character axis, we're going to do some animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to, at the beginning, we're going to just move everything out of shot like this. And then down by about here, we're going to sort of bring everything sort of back down to that. And what we'll also do is we'll do like a little offset. So we'll do like a 2-frame offset. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me like a nice kind of like little cascading animation coming through. So I kind of like all that. That's pretty good. I think that's going to be nice as a version. So I've made some changes since I iterated. So we're going to actually go through and we're going to replace that for a moment. You can see that my render name has now incremented to match my batch name. Everything else is the same. So we're going to render out that version. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to make a version 3. We're going to iterate, increment this time. So it's now version 3. We're going to come back and then maybe we'll change that to be left to right. So now it's going to be coming in the opposite way. And then maybe also we'll make the text kind of like even sort of bigger. So that's all looking pretty good. We'll now save those changes over version 3. Come back out to here. We're also going to render that version out. Come back to my my batch reels desktop. You can see I've got my version 2 and my version 3. So to make it nice and easy, we're going to just move those now into my normal reel group. So you can see here I've got all my 3 versions. And once again, if we split this up into our source sequence view, what we can actually now do is we can use our workspace to be able to swap those in. So maybe, you know, we're kind of looking here. This is our version 1 that we swapped in. Maybe our version 2, we want to see what that looks like. So we can go Control Shift and R, and you can see now that we've got our version 2. Or maybe we'd like to see what our version 3 is going to look like. And you can see that has now got my version 3. And once again, you know, you can kind of keep these clips really wherever you want. I'm just kind of trying to show you very manually the process of, you know, where the renders are going. So, you know, where they actually kind of live inside of here. Instead of moving them, we could actually copy them into this area. Or we could sort of kind of, you know, replace them in situ. You've got many, many options, but I'm just trying to kind of explain in a fairly sort of simple, easy to understand way how you kind of use this versioning mechanism from the batch desktop into your normal sort of Reels desktop. So I hope that makes sense. We can go away and play with it. Once again, there's nothing wrong with using the normal batch effects in an edit, but you know, sometimes you, like you say, you may just want to sort of play around. You may want to sort of version things up and keep like a whole history of the work and the renders that you've done, and then just be able to quickly kind of swap in versions or options into your editorial timeline as you work. So I hope you enjoyed that. Our next episode, we're going to be looking at how all this work that we've done, we get back out to the outside world as kind of renders, and see how we can sort of tidy up everything and then finally archive off our projects. So it's been good, and I hope to see you in the next episode.